So as mentioned in the recent video done on Police Quest, I'm not all that much of a point-and-click adventure person and have never really been. I've dabbled a little here and there with certain games and have fond memories associated with a couple of them, being treated to our one PC's copy of Day of the Tentacle in primary school, for example. But yeah, it's one of those genres that's a bit of a hole for me. There are a couple of reasons for this, one of the main ones being having an Amiga as opposed to a PC when I was younger. Point-and-click games used to come on like 10 floppies or whatever. The amount of disc swapping seemed like way too much. The quality of the games was pretty comparable, but the lack of disc swapping made the genre much more accessible on PC. But hey, whatever. There are still certain things that I notice, and one of them more recently, I guess in the past year or so, has been, well, what I guess you could call a re-evaluation of Sierra's games. I'm not sure if that's necessarily the right word. In the main, it's probably based off people sharing their fond memories of such games more than anything else, but to me it feels like a re-evaluation. And that's even led to revival, certainly in the case of the very recent and successful new episodic King's Quest game. Perhaps one of the reasons why it feels like a re-evaluation is because I'm British, oddly enough. Looking back through some of the old archives and going through my own memories, I'm not sure if we ever really got Sierra games. I mean, we had them physically, but we didn't get them. Almost as if something about them was just too American, I suppose. Leisure Suit Larry is a prime example. In America, that series is pretty damn well liked, isn't it? I mean, even people who generally don't have a lot of time for other Sierra games have time for that one. Here in England, I think we probably hated that series most of all. Some of the old reviews you can find on places like Amiga Magazine Rack and what have you are savage. We just didn't get the humour, I suppose. It was easier to just scorch it as a pile of immature smut, almost as if it was an actual porn game as opposed to a comedy based on a somewhat pathetic character. Embarrassingly, I didn't even think I actually twigged that Leisure Suit Larry wasn't just a porn game until the release of Magna Cum Laude, if you can believe that. Even with the biggest series, it varies across the board. You can see scores that range from the 80s and 90s to the 40s and even lower. The same couldn't be said for LucasArts. In general, those games were loved just as much here as they were over there. But Sierra, we were just always a bit iffy. Sierra games are, for me, well, very interesting. The difference between Sierra and LucasArts games, even more so, is not just that they had a different sense of humour or anything like that, they had entirely different philosophies on what made a good adventure game. Perhaps one thing sticks out more than anything else to me. One of the reasons why a lot of people here hated Sierra, and one of the reasons why I love and hate their games. LucasArts always hated the idea of death. By and large, in a lot of their famous games, you could never die. At most, it would be an Easter egg. At the very core of their philosophy was the idea that everyone should be able to get through their games, and there should never be a point where you couldn't win one of their games. Perhaps there's a cinematic philosophy there too. Even if you're stuck on something, you should never ever have to actually go backwards and repeat something, which is what death tends to do. Sierra, on the other hand, had a philosophy that was more based in a wholly different school. Choose your own adventure books, perhaps, or maybe even D&D. That death should be a learning experience, or that even screwing up and making a game unwinnable should be a learning experience. You know the mistake you made, so you won't do it again. It'll be a more frustrating adventure, but it might well be a more satisfying one when it's finished, depending on what you like anyways. And more than that, Sierra loved death. That much is abundantly clear. I can almost imagine that the most fun anyone ever had while creating a Sierra game was in looking at the plot, looking at the step outline and what have you, and brainstorming all the different ways that you, the player, could mess it all up. Whether it's something fantastical like King's Quest or grounded like Police Quest, death is an event in Sierra games, worthy of a big description, or even in the legendary case of Space Quest, the occasional instant replay that details exactly how you blew it, a little reminder not to make that mistake again, and those all too familiar options to restore, restart or quit. It's no wonder that just about every famous Sierra game has at least one video on YouTube dedicated to all the different ways through which you can lose that game. I may have never played Laura Bow the Dagger of Amon-Ra, but I know that if Laura tries to pull a massive sword down from a wall, it's going to end up in her chest. I was fully aware of the grave importance of police procedure before ever starting Police Quest. I knew to never press that big red button in the middle of the console, and it was pretty clear that Graham should just stay the fuck away from any kind of wither at all times. The biggest fans of Sierra's games probably all have one thing in common. Through their games, they learned to enjoy losing, for they would do it over and over and over. And it's this philosophy of death that has always drawn me to Sierra's games somewhat. It was definitely one of the big factors in making me want to cover Police Quest along with everything else. And it may well be something that pushes me towards having a look at a couple of others at some point. Whereas, if I'm honest with myself, as much as I have good memories associated with LucasArts games like Monkey Island and what have you, I doubt I'm ever going to feel like truly revisiting them. Sierra's games may be a bit less visually impressive, they may be totally cornball at points, they may just entirely exist on utterly shaky ground, but there's something about them that just appeals so much more. And it seems to me like these days more and more people are feeling that way. That they were certainly more than a match for LucasArts and perhaps even better than them in certain areas. Whereas some games by the likes of Roberta Williams, Al Lowe and the guys from Andromeda would be brutally mocked in the past, they're now kind of revered again. And it's pretty nice to see, if I'm honest. And who knows, maybe that could be something that'll spur me on to covering more adventure games in the future and fill in that particular gap in my gaming knowledge, for it is a pretty big gap. Anywho, that's all for this little postscript. See you next video, folks. Have a good one. Bye!